The cadaveric spasm is one of the pivotal pieces of evidence that the Seattle Police Department clings to as absolute proof that Kurt Cobain committed suicide. Applying forensic science to the death of Kurt Cobain, was he found gripping the barrel of the shotgun so tightly it had to be pried from his hand? A cadaveric spasm is an extremely rare occurrence of muscle rigidity that occurs at the moment of death. And much like other evidence of forensic science, when examining a death and trying to determine the cause, it is significant if a body is found in a cadaveric spasm, as it can crystallize the time frame and the last activity that person had done before death. It is an extremely rare phenomenon. It is instantaneous, and unlike rigor mortis, it doesn't follow the natural stages of death, and I will be going through that in another slide. It's not the natural stage of muscle rigidity that falls in the timeline of death. A cadaveric spasm usually occurs in small muscle groups, and it is most often found in the hands. And it only occurs in deaths that are extremely traumatic, coupled with intense emotion, such as suicide victims clutch the weapon. In accidental deaths, such as drowning, they find the victim clutching the dirt or grass. They're trying to pull themselves out of the water. In homicide deaths, they find the victim clutching evidence of their attacker's hair, clothing, or even the weapon of their assailant. It gives a little chart here on the left that kind of shows the difference between rigor mortis and a cadaveric spasm as described. But according to forensic science, did the Seattle Police Department find Kurt Cobain clutching the shotgun in a cadaveric spasm? The Seattle Police Department has always maintained that Kurt's body was found with his hand gripping the barrel of the shotgun in a death grip. His hand was gripping the shotgun so tightly it had to be pried out of his hand. And they're using this to convey without a doubt that he's the one that fired the gun. And they're also using this as a theory that they are saying, along with the development of a 35mm film 20 years later, they're using that spasm to explain why the shotgun shell was found on the opposite side of his body from the ejection port. If you look at the photo here, just because it does normally occur in the hands, you can see a couple of photos of his right hand. From that top one, the angle, it does look like his hand could be clenched in a fist. And then when you see the other photos that are on the edges of the photographs where they took pictures of all of the things around his body, you can see even in the first one, it doesn't really look clenched in a fist. And then when you see the second one, his pointer finger is sticking out. So that's just an angle from the top. And I think anyone, when you rest your hand, it doesn't rest in a fist. It doesn't rest with your fingers straight out. It rests kind of curled in like that, with your fingers a little bent. As far as the left hand, it's hard to tell without seeing the whole thing. Does it look clenched? Regardless of that speculation, The fact is, as we will see next, when you define a cadaveric spasm, did they even find him that way at all? And what do we have here? Oh yes, the case report from the time they decided to finally develop 35mm film 20 years after his death, on the anniversary of his death, and then give what they called, by the way, this was not a second investigation. They were not reopening the case. They just wanted to revisit the evidence and try to justify why the shotgun shell was found on the other side of Kurt's body on the left when the weapon was upside down and the ejection port was facing the right. Okay, so weapon. When I first looked at the 35mm crime scene photos, I noticed that the Remington 20 gauge shotgun was lying on victim's chest with receiver facing up. I also observed a spent yellow shell casing lying on a coat at the right side of the photo. In the magazine, I could observe a yellow round, not fully chambered, that appeared to have malfunctioned. I was aware that for the spent casing to have landed on the victim's left, the weapon would have had to turn 180 degrees from what it was found. It appeared evident to what had happened when the weapon was fired, but I requested assistance from SPD Range Armorer Kurt Wilson. I showed Officer Wilson a photo of victim holding the weapon, but I did not identify the victim. Officer Wilson stated that the fired round would have ejected in the direction where it was found, and the second round probably malfunctioned due to victim holding the barrel, which prevented free movement of the barrel. The weapon probably pivoted when fired and fell to the present position. Held in this manner, the fired round would have ejected to where it was depicted in the photo. I mean, what a circular way of stating this. I don't know about you, but having read this, I had to read it several times going, okay, the fire round would have ejected, and then the second round probably malfunctioned. What second round? That makes no sense. If it malfunctioned, I mean, you can't shoot yourself after you've already shot yourself dead. So the second round malfunctioned, causing the first round to malfunction? Wouldn't it have malfunctioned on the first round, causing the weapon to jerk? That was the only round that was fired. If it malfunctioned, it didn't fire. So it somehow malfunctioned on some second round. The second round probably malfunctioned due to victim holding the barrel. So he shot himself twice, or attempted to, after it already perforated the roof of his mouth and the gunshot went into his brain? Like, what are you saying here? It doesn't make sense. So you have to kind of dig through the bullshit. This is what makes sense to me. It doesn't really, in my opinion, say that in that memo. If fired properly, because the shell went to the left, but then it somehow malfunctioned, flipped 180 degrees, at which point he grabbed it in the cadaveric spasm at the very moment of death and held the weapon upside down, prevented it from being found on the right hand side of his body where it should have been found. Yeah, that's like some really circuitous word origami. And lies are circuitous. They go in this thing, oh, but if this happened and then this, and there's a bunch of explanation, and you really try to make that plausible. You have to remember that story. It's the more you have to say in order to cover up what has happened, that's the indication of a lie. The truth is simple. There is no word origami. There is no obfuscation of fact. There is no, it appeared the malfunction and then the thing, and then it went and it flipped 180 degrees. And really, I mean, it sounds ludicrous. The truth is simple. The truth is, the gun was fired right side up, and probably not by him. And then they just threw it down. It's not really as if this crime scene was so well prepared that some professional went in there and did it. No. They came upon the scene as they were expecting to find it due to all the crap in the media and all the prior calls to the lake property that were set up well in advance. And back in the day, we didn't have social media, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have digital cameras. I mean, it was a big deal when we got a fax machine. So we didn't have any alternate sources of information except for what the media was telling us. And they are just as receptive to that as any of us. They don't know the scene. In fact, cops hated us, really. I mean, it was just kind of like, why are these freaks now everywhere? Which is what happened with the explosion of Nevermind, is the punk scene really blew into the mainstream. And they were seeing it everywhere. And they never were too kind to us in the beginning, and to them, I mean, another dead junkie punk. It was obvious, and the lies are not coming because they, I don't think they were really colluding as much as they are trying to cover their butts, because they didn't do anything. They didn't do a single thing to look at this as possible homicide at all. They walked in, called it, walked right back out, told the media, bam, over. That's over. Your investigation is done. This is what it is, folks. Media circus. Worldwide media circus. And that settled it in everyone's mind. They're on. They screwed up, and now they have to come back and tell us weird announcements and like this. If you look at any other case today, even when they highly suspect that it is an accidental overdose, like Philip Seymour Hoffman, we didn't hear anything for a month or a couple of months later, after they fully do an autopsy report and a forensics investigation and have all of the facts. They do not walk in, say, this is what it is, and there's a bunch of media outside, they want to know, let's go right out and tell them, without doing any autopsy, no blood examination. They did no fingerprint of the scene. They know no, hair and fiber samples, no analysis whatsoever. They had called it the minute they walked in. Like, you don't walk in with preconceived notions of what it is based on your own bias. That's not good law enforcement or detective work. It is shoddy. And now the police, they just have to, the second the second round malfunctioned. I mean, please give me a freaking break. Pretty much anyone with any common sense can read that and think that sounds a little freaking insane. Along with that report, we have to compare it to the original report that was filed with the discovery of his body. There was no shotgun lying on his chest, as Chazinski or Sazinski, however you say it, is saying. The original report describes the shotgun being between his legs, with the end of the barrel resting slightly above his belt line. So why is he saying it is lying across his chest? Unless someone replaced the gun and then took the photos, or that is in fact not where it was lying, or they didn't report it correctly when they were first there. It is contradicting. So that is the problem, SPD. The original report that you filed, the biggest thing is you said that you found him in the early stages of putrefaction. The victim is cold. He is in the early stages of putrefaction, and there is evidence of skin slippage. Dr. Hartshorn also notes the webbing of his left hand and the impression of the barrel. So if they found him in the early stages of putrefaction with skin slippage, that occurs after rigor mortis. Rigor mortis is the third stage of the death. This is science. Everyone goes through it. The cadaveric spasm happens earlier. It does happen at the instant of death. The thing is, the muscles, once you're in putrefaction, you're in the fourth stage already. You are past rigor mortis. And you're in the last stage of death, and that is the decay. So he's already past rigor mortis. When a body is past rigor mortis, there is no stiffness or muscle rigidity left to find. The hand is no longer gripping the shotgun the way they are claiming. They did not witness his hand holding it in a death grip. They didn't pry his hand from the weapon. It was gripping so tightly they had to pry it out of his hands. It's impossible. He was already past rigor mortis, and past rigor mortis, the muscles of the body are completely destroyed. They didn't observe it. By the time he was found, there is no scientific way possible that they could have found him this way. And if they did, then why isn't it mentioned at all in the original report? You would think that such a rare event, such as a cadaveric spasm, which is so rare that there are factions of the scientific community that argue whether or not it even exists. This is not a normal incident. One reference from a forensic investigator had been doing that job for 30 years, and he had only witnessed it 3 times. It is extremely rare, and you'd think if it's that rare, that would have been noted somewhere in the original report, but it isn't. It is something that they came up with later to justify, without a doubt, that he was gripping that gun, therefore he is the one who shot himself. When in fact, they just found his hand around the barrel. And anyone could have placed his hand around the barrel after death. He certainly wasn't gripping it that way. So I don't know why they continue to state this as a fact. And here we have Detective Chizinski holding the shotgun, looking like he killed some sort of rare elephant or other endangered species, and he's going to take it home and mount it on his wall like a trophy. Anyway, I'm going to go over the 8 stages of deaths just so you understand exactly why this is bullshit. And the time frames I have put are on average. It can be completely sped up or slowed down depending on mostly hot or colder temperatures. So the first stage is death, and that is the irreversible stopping all cell function, the point of no return, and no revival possible. The body begins to cool down and reaches the temperature of the atmosphere within 12 to 18 hours. Second stage, primary relaxation. The loss of all muscle tone, drop in jaw, dilation of pupils, the loss of facial wrinkles. If the body is lying in a supine position, it's on the back, the flattening of the buttocks, the calves, the shoulders. There's no muscle left in the body, and it just completely flattens out. And the blood, no longer supported by an active circulatory system, begins to fall to the lowest part of the body due to gravity, and usually settles there within 6 to 8 hours. Then the third stage, rigor mortis, and that is the progressive rigidity of all the muscles in the body. It's a chemical process, and the energy carrying molecules break down, and in that process the muscle proteins are completely destroyed as they are broken down by different enzymes. And the normal rule is it takes 12 hours to complete. The body remains in rigor mortis for 12 hours, and then it takes 12 hours for rigor mortis to pass, and then it passes into the fourth stage of death, and that is the secondary relaxation. And that's when we're into decay. Decay actually begins in rigor mortis, but when through the second relaxation, we're talking putrefaction. There's no immune system anymore, so all of the bacteria invades the body and it begins to digest tissue. Organs begin to liquefy inside the body. The consumption of tissues produces fermented gas, which permeates the body and starts to secrete from the body, causing bloating. And part of that bloating is skin slippage. As gases rising from the body will separate the skin from the body, and sometimes it just makes it loose. Sometimes there's little blisters even. Decomposition, like I said, begins in rigor, But this relaxation is complete after 36 to 48 hours. He was already in the fourth stage of death when his body was discovered, so there is no possible way they found a cadaveric spasm. And these are the reference books that I read studying this. I don't think you want to look at some of those photos, but anyway, without a doubt, cadaveric spasm continues through the stage of rigor mortis and the body and disappears with the onset of secondary relaxation. No exception. By the time they found his body, there was no cadaveric spasm.